Good morning. The time is now 9:30 a.m. and a quorum of the State Board of Education is present. State Board of Education meeting of February 13, 2018 is called to order. I would like to thank Superintendent Randy Lipa, his staff, and the Wayne RESA Board for hosting us today, and want to thank everyone who came to the meeting and to the reception ahead of time to have some conversation. So thank you to that. We'll be right back with you guys to do a presentation. First order of business is approval of agenda in order of priority. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and supported. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Introduction of state board members. Marilyn?
Yes. Starting on my left is the state superintendent and chairman of the board, Brian Whiston. And as we go around the table to the left, the co-president of the board is Richard Zeile. He resides in Dearborn. The other co-president of the board, Cassandra Albrecht, resides in Rochester Hills. Michelle Fecto is the board secretary. She's from Detroit. She's on her way. Nikki Snyder is the board's NASB delegate. She lives in Dexter. NASB is the National Association of State Boards of Education. This year's Michigan Teacher of the Year is Luke Wilcox. And when he's not here, he's a math teacher at East Kentwood High School, which is Kentwood Public Schools, which is in the Grand Rapids area. And as we go across the table, Eileen Weiser, board member from Ann Arbor. Lupe Ramos-Montini, board member from Grand Rapids. Pamela Pugh, board member from Saginaw. Next to me is the board's treasurer, Tom McMillan from Oakland Township. I'm Marilyn Schneider. I'm the State Board of Education executive. And here's Michelle Fecto.
And I'd like to welcome a couple new people to the department. Dr. Diedrich Martin, who's head of the School Reform Office. Welcome. He's going to do a presentation today, and he's been here all 24 hours. And Shalon Doxey, who is the acting deputy superintendent for P20 systems. I know there's a large audience, but we'd like you to just quickly introduce yourself and say if you're from a district or a parent or whatever.
Good morning, Vanessa Kiesler, Deputy Superintendent, Michigan Department of Education. Good morning, Wendy Larvick, Chief of Staff to State Superintendent Brian Whiston.
Good morning, again, Shalon Doxey, Interim Deputy Superintendent for P20 System and Student Transitions.
Good morning, everyone. Sheila Alice, Chief Deputy Superintendent to Brian Whiston.
Good morning again, David Martin, SRO.
I'm Martin Ackley. I'm the Director of Public and Governmental Affairs at the Michigan Department of Education.
Stacey Griffin, Wayne RESA.
Linda Olin, Wayne RESA.
Jennifer Chambers of Detroit News. Lori Hayden, Detroit Free Press.
Linda Kyle, Wayne RESA, at Improvement Consultant.
Kathy Mary, Wayne RESA. Susan Feathergill, Board Member of Van Buren Schools.
Debbie Clancy, Wayne RESA.
Kathy Emmerich, Wayne RESA.
Terrence Lunger, Superintendent of Calhoun Intermediate School District.
Roland Wong, Merckville School Board. Doug Law from RESA.
Jen Vanderwater, Board Member from the City Public Schools. Joe Malowski, Board President, Brian Public Schools. Bernicia Fuller, Wayne RESA.
Roswell Hussein, Wayne RESA.
Anubhav Truth, Wayne RESA. Julia Hill, Wayne RESA. Mary Treese, Wayne RESA.
Joe Musial and RESA.
Pat Drake, Wayne RESA.
Nancy Dyrod, Board President, Dearborn Heights School District number 7.
Aisha Baldwin, PTA.
Tom Beachai, Superintendent of Trafford Public Schools.
Sybil Collins Wilson, Michigan PTA.
Good morning, Jonathan Primo, I'm a board member at District 7 Schools.
Kim Hoover, Student Transportation Consultant, Wayne County RESA.
Cheryl Shingles, Wayne RESA.
Shauna Walker, Wayne Westland, Board President. Carol Liddell, Wayne Westland, Vice President.
Tom Buckler, Wayne Westline, School Board Member.
Hi, Alicia Fly, Chief Academic Officer, Macomb Intermediate School District.
Good morning, Paulette Merrill, representative from School Specialty Child Home.
Hi, I'm the Chief of National Regional Consultant for Chalkback and School Special Needs. Thank you. Good morning, Kelly Turner, Territory Sales Manager, School Special Needs.
Morning, Ahmed Ismail. I'm on the board in Grosse Pointe Public Schools.
Howard Barron, Bloomfield Hills trustee.
Karen Kelly, Wayne RESA.
Margie McAnally, Superintendent of Romulus Community Schools.
Glenn Rescorski, Wayne RESA.
Shirley Tolliver, Vice President, South Redford Board of Education.
Good morning, Steve Ezekiel, Wayne RESA.
Sharon Warren, Wayne RESA.
Deidre Thornsberry, Wayne RESA.
Matt Sweeney, Wayne County Paul Jackson Network.
Good morning, Central Michigan Works, representing Wayne College Private and Access Network.
Michael Reed, President of Dearborn Board of Education.
Mary Gardner, Wayne RESA Board President.
Danielle Funderburg, Romulus Community Schools, and in Wayne RESA School District.
Good morning, Jim Petrie, Wayne RESA School Board.
Good morning, everybody. Jim Berry, President of Wayne RESA School Board and President of Meldale Northern Ark School Board District. I was going to
Donna McDowell, Workforce Project Consultant for Wayne RESA.
Randy Leap, Superintendent, Wayne RESA.
Morning, Paul Sola, Associate Superintendent for Educational Services, Wayne RESA.
Again, thank you everybody for being here. If you want to offer public comment at today's meeting, please complete a form that you'll find on the table on the back right of the door. Forms are, as I said, are available up there. Public comment will take place at approximately 1 o'clock today. First item on the committee of the whole agenda is an update on educational programs and services from Wayne County. RESA supporting the top 10 and 10. Again, Dr. Liebler, thank you to you and your staff for hosting us today, and take it away, please.
Well, good morning.
Morning.
It is great to have everybody here. We're excited about having the State Board of Education meeting here in Wayne County. We know for several of you, you're coming home, and we're excited to have everybody here. We have a big crowd, and we're excited to hear about what's going on in Wayne County. And we're also excited to see the business of the State Board of Education. Obviously, it has a big impact on all of us. A couple of recognitions to start with. I want to recognize Tom Nichai again. He's in the back. He's the superintendent of Hamtramck. Tom, stand up for a second. Tom supplied the punchkis today. It is Fat Tuesday. That's right. It is Fat Tuesday, and you are in Wayne County. And so, of course, we're going to have punchkis from Hamtramck. What was the store again, Tom?
The new Martha Washington Bakery.
Yes. Absolutely. So thanks to Tom, and thanks to the wonderful students at the Wayne Westland Career Center. They prepared the other pastries that you had a chance to enjoy this morning at the meet and greet. And if you've been to the Wayne Westland Vocational Center, it is one of the premier places in not only the state, but I would say in the entire country. Remarkable programs there. A couple other quick recognitions. I just want to recognize our State Superintendent, Brian Whiston. Brian is also coming home. He's a good friend and colleague to all of us. We couldn't be more excited to have Brian leading us in our important work.
Is that because you wanted me out of Wayne?
Brian wasn't going to let it go very long, but Brian's a superstar in our eyes, and we're blessed to have someone like him leading our state, and I just couldn't be happier to have him here working with us on the important work. So, Brian, thanks for everything that you do. And I also had to give a shout out to Sheila Alice, your Deputy Superintendent. Sheila and I were colleagues for a lot of years. I don't even know how many, Sheila, but a lot.
Many.
Yes, many years in Livonia. Yeah, absolutely. And Sheila is, in my eyes, another gem for you to have doing your work. And I know as loyal as she was in Livonia, I'm sure she is to the Michigan Department of Education. So, Sheila, we're happy to have you here this morning. I also quickly want to just open it up for a couple of words of, and I say couple for Mr. Berry because we know what he can do, but Mr. Berry is going to give just a couple of words of welcome from the school board here at Wayne RESA, remarkable 5 members that do great work on behalf of children here. So, Mr. Berry, please welcome everybody.
Yes, thank you very much. Brian, do I get to 1 o'clock?
Yeah. Oh, boy. The gavel's coming down.
On behalf of my school board and, of course, Wayne County RESA, we are glad to have you come and do your meeting here. You're always welcome here. Like you say, a lot of your local people, which is nice. But on behalf of my school board member and Linda, who's can't be here today, she's supportive of all of us here. So whatever you guys do for us, I know we always looking at education for our students. Some of us work around local school boards as well, and that's very important. So again, on behalf of my school board, your school board, nice meeting you. Maybe we'll see you again soon. Maybe next year put it on the calendar. But again,
Happy to have you.
thanks for coming, and hope you're welcome. I hope you enjoyed all the pesties and all that stuff. We pesties, whatever we had there. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're always welcome.
All right, so we're ready to roll if you guys are ready to roll.
Yep.
All right, we're very, obviously very proud to have the opportunity to spend some time with you and talk to you about what's going on in Wayne County with our educational systems and programs in our school districts. We represent 33 school systems here in Wayne County, and we represent over 100 charter schools, and that equals about 270,000 students that are educated here in Wayne County. And so, as you well know, we are everything here. We're as diverse a county as you're going to find. If we started in Flat Rock and started driving north, you would see cows and horses and everything you would see in a rural community, going all the way to one of the largest metropolitan areas in the country, heading right into the city of Detroit. We're big, we're small, we're rich, we're poor. We have every type of student that you could imagine here in Wayne County. And we're very, very proud of the diversity that we support here among our school districts. And so what we want to do today is highlight some of the value-added work that we're doing here in Wayne County, because I'd love to have, very honestly, all day to talk to you about all the services that we provide. And of course, you're familiar with what goes on in intermediate school systems. You're familiar with the support that we provide in a variety of different behind-the-scenes areas. For example, here in Wayne County, we support not only the 33 school systems here in all of the computer services that are behind the scenes, but we support them in everything that you could imagine. We're actually 66 school systems. We work with other ISDs, supporting them in everything from internet hookup to payroll, HR systems, et cetera. We run very large programs here for preschool. We have a significant special education population here in Wayne County that's supported by our organization. Purchasing that we do for school districts, on and on and on. All those things that you know ISDs do, we do here at Wayne County. But above and beyond that, we want to talk about specifically some of the real unique things that we do that we're very proud of here, that we think are making a difference with students. And so what I'd like to do is talk about a little bit about the focus on some of the value-added things that we're doing. With me today is Dr. Paul Salah and Donna McDowell. They're going to talk specifically about our education services programs that we're doing, and Donna's been a partner with me working on a very unique program as it relates to college and career counseling or workforce development from a bigger standpoint. We're going to talk to you a little bit more in detail about that today. So we're going to talk about first our regional enhancement millage, then we're going to have Paul talk about some specific things and specific ways that we're supporting school districts as it relates to students' learning. And then we're going to finish it up talking about this workforce development project that we have. So with that, I also want to highlight here at Wayne RESA, we believe that we're leaders here in the state of Michigan. We have a variety of expertise within our county, and we're very proud with the involvement that we've had in local school system activities throughout the state of Michigan. Just a couple of examples. Steve Ezekian, who's our deputy superintendent, who introduced himself a few minutes ago. He's the president of the Michigan School Board Association this year, or the Michigan School Business Officials organization. And so we're very proud of that. Paul Salah is going to be the chair next year of the GELN network. That's the Educational Leadership Network. The experts in education from all of the ISDs. Paul is going to be the chair of that organization next year. I'll be the president of MAISA next year, providing leadership in that role. Karen Howie, who's our executive director for special education, is involved in multiple different special education organizations and leadership roles, and we're very active in what's going on in special education here in Wayne County. We also were very active with the presentation that you're going to have after us, which is the presentation on the new school funding system recommendations. We were on the steering committee. We were the ones who were working with Oakland County and several others to get that up and running. And so we're excited about that work, but we're very involved from the get-go in regards to doing that. So on top of a variety of other activities across the state of Michigan that we're involved in, we really feel that here in Wayne RESA we have a voice, and we have a pulse on what's going on in education in Michigan, and have a good handle on what we need to do to move forward. So we're actively partners with you, and again, are blessed to have someone like Brian and his staff to partner with. So we're going to jump right into it. I'm not sure we're ready to jump into it yet. It's going to be a minute. So I am going to hop right into the thing that I wanted to touch base with first, and we'll catch up with the slides as we get into it. But I wanted to talk about specifically the Wayne RESA regional enhancement millage that was passed a year ago in November. This was a significant issue for our school districts. There have not been very many regional enhancement millages passed in the state of Michigan. In fact, we've tried in Wayne County several times. About a year ago in November, with the leadership of our superintendents and our organization here, we were able to pass a 2 mil increase for our local school districts. And when we think about what's happened with school funding over the last 10 years and what our local school districts have been challenged with, of course, this school funding study is the long-term solution, but we felt we had to be proactive and do something in the short term here to help our local school districts out. And so that millage was the 2 mil levy. It's for 6 years. It's going to last for 6 years, and it can be used for any purpose that the school district wants it to be used for. And so one of the things that we're really, really proud of is we've been monitoring very close what our local school districts are doing with those added funds. And that's important to us, not only from a standpoint of saying that we're good stewards of this money, but to actually show people what can happen when there are additional dollars put into education in our state. And so we passed that millage 2 years ago. It brings in about $77 million. It's about $370 per student. That was an increase for our local school districts. And I meet with our local superintendents every year in the summer. I meet with them individually, and I talk about what their needs are, what's going on in their school district. And I said, you know, there's a variety of things that we can do for our local school districts, but to help them garner an additional $370 per student was one of the most important things that we were able to do for them. And so this was a significant accomplishment for us. We were actually on the ballot with the regional transportation proposal. It was a presidential election, so there are a lot of competing things on the ballot, but voters here in Wayne County felt that they wanted to support their local school districts with local money. And not only did it pass in Detroit, but for the first time it passed in Elk County. So every single, if you added up all the votes in outside of Detroit, it passed overall in Elk County and in Detroit, which led to a nice victory for us. And so what I'll do in a second is I'll talk to you about the types of things that they're spending that money on, because, again, we're very, very proud of how they have used those resources. A couple of things that you'll see on the slide. First and foremost, for some of our school districts, it helped them to get the financial footing that they needed to move forward. As you know, there's a new system in Michigan where school districts are required to have shoot towards a 5% fund balance. For some of our school districts, it actually got them out of deficit. For some of our other districts, it got them over that 5% fund balance hump. Most importantly, it created stability for them. And so when I'm out, again, talking to superintendents in the summer, when I meet with them, we're not talking about what they need to do from a budget standpoint, what kind of revenue enhancement ideas they're sorting out. They're now back talking about what are we doing educationally in our school districts. That's a focus for superintendents because they've had that pressure to some extent alleviated. It's been palpable to go out and talk to them. It's been noticeable to hear them talk about what's going on in their school district, what they're focused on, what their big issues are for next year. And really now it's focused on those things as opposed to what are we going to do to make sure our budget's balanced, what are we going to do to reduce our costs, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been a significant bump in that regards for our local school districts. The way they're spending the money, there is a significant amount of investment that's gone into by several of our school districts into technology. And so I'll mention the 5 or 6 areas that were the most significant as we asked them what they're doing with the money. We actually have on the Wayne RESA website a summary of every single school district and what they're doing with their enhancement money. And it lists 4 or 5 items by each school district of what they're doing. But technology was a high priority for them. Facility improvements and renovations was another one that they were falling behind on, that they were able to get caught up on. Class size, I think, was the most popular one that was identified. School districts that either had recently increased class size or had not been able to reduce class size in many years were able to reduce class size in their school districts. And so that was a high priority. STEM programs was an area that we saw in several of our school districts. A couple of districts creating brand new STEM labs. Staffing, it was teachers where now for one of their specials, starting in 5th and 6th grade, they're going to a STEM classroom and getting instruction in those particular curriculum areas. And so that was another item that was high on their priority list. Professional development, especially as we've been concerned about what's happened with Title II at the federal level. That's been a real hit for our local school districts, but they were able to do the things that they needed to do with teacher professional development. And so those are examples of probably the highest areas of priorities where our local school districts are utilizing those additional resources. And so it's really been going to good, let's see if we can see this here. Look at that. There we go. Now you'll be able to see them here on your front screens. And so as I said, this is just highlighting the types of things that we had shared. $77 million. And again, Wayne RESA keeps none of that money. Every single dime that comes in within 10 days, we're required by law to distribute it out to local school districts on a per student basis. $370 per student, and they've been using it to improve their programs. Here are the things, again, listed: technology, facility upgrades, class size. Security is another area that I didn't mention that's been a high priority for some of our school districts. Several of our districts have updated their bus fleet with these dollars, and I had mentioned STEM programs, and I list a few other things, but I highlight there with the 2 asterisks program preservation. Again, stabilizing their budget, and in some cases a couple of our districts able to get out of deficit was significant for them to be able to improve their programs, because it wasn't an issue of them saying, well, what are we going to have to cut next year? It was an issue of, okay, we're back on stable footing again, and we can look about what we're doing for improvements. So I think the money has been very, very well spent. And as it comes to, from a Wayne RESA's perspective, one of the things that we've been able to do, value added for our local school districts over the last couple of years, this was a significant item for us. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Salah, who's going to talk to you about some of the innovative things that we're doing and just some of our strategy in regards to how we attack trying to support 33 school systems, 110 charter schools in the areas where they need support. So, Paul, go ahead, and we're going to let you borrow the mic.
Thank you. Good morning. Again, it's good to see you all. So I was really impressed with Randy. He didn't miss a beat despite all that technology. So I will say also I'm very happy to be here, because I joke, before we came in the room, I've been here almost 4 years and I actually got a name tag today. So I'm feeling pretty important. This is a day of firsts for Paul. First time presenting to the state board, first time with a name tag. So thank you.
It was a 3.5-year probation. 90 days for everybody else.
So very excited to be here and just share some of the instructional initiatives for Wayne County RESA. Just to give you sort of a sense of kind of the breadth and scope of Wayne County. Randy mentioned that we're just a large county, 33 school districts, 270,000 kids, just incredibly diverse. That includes over 17,000 teachers. So when you think about training and providing support to teachers in Wayne County, you can't do 1 or 2 workshops and kind of cover everybody. You really need to have a very robust and in-depth approach to supporting educators. And so we've built a system here to really emphasize the importance of professional learning, deep consulting, follow-up coaching, pushing into school districts and having deep contextual conversations with central office administrators, school principals, as well as teachers. So with that said, I want to focus on a couple of key points as part of the instructional element. So I want to talk a little bit about the philosophical framework that really undergirds the way with which we do business at Wayne RESA in terms of meeting the needs through our delivery model. And I really want to try to tie contextually the way in which we align ourselves with the 10 in 10 initiative. I could probably spend 3 hours talking about the alignment with 10 in 10, but what I've done instead is we've actually noted the strategies at the bottom of the slides, so you get a sense of where the alignment actually occurs. So you'll see that as I go through the next several slides. So this quote is one of my favorites. This is a Michael Fullen quote. That's from one of his books titled Coherence. And the reason why I like it is because, in my mind, this is the essence of 10 in 10. And I'm just going to read it. I don't like to read slides normally, but I think this one's particularly important, so I want to take a minute and just really kind of dissect this for a minute. So what Fullen says is that what we need is consistency of purpose, policy, and practice. Structure and strategy are not enough. The solution requires the individual and collective ability to build shared meaning, capacity, and commitment to action. When large numbers of people have a deeply understood sense of what needs to be done and see their part in achieving that purpose, coherence emerges and powerful things happen. To me, that is the essence of 10 in 10. I mean, if you think about what we're trying to accomplish as a state, keywords jump out. Consistency of purpose, that's huge. We can't continue to change direction every other week or every other year, right? That really hurts us in the education field because it doesn't allow us to focus on any key initiative. Structure and strategy are not enough. We talk structure and strategy to death. We do that a lot. And I see that we're actually moving away from focusing exclusively on structure and strategy and really talking about implementation, getting to a place where we see these practices take place in our school districts. Collective ability to build shared meaning, capacity, and commitment, that is huge. And when large numbers of people actually move in the same direction, things happen. And that's the essence of what Fullen is saying, and that's what we're trying to accomplish with 10 in 10. So in Wayne County, that means a lot of different things. First, it means starting with a robust early childhood program, which represents 450 classrooms, 14,000 slots. We actually have 14,000 slots, which represents 7,000 students in Wayne County. We have a budget of about $52 million in Wayne County, and we employ over 20 full-time staff to monitor early childhood programs across Wayne County. So that, if you think of that as sort of a foundational element, and then you move into this diagram that's on the PowerPoint in front of you. And the reason why this diagram is important is because it speaks to several characteristics that make up Wayne County. So we recognize that meeting the needs of 17,000 students or 17,000 teachers is massive. And so what we've done is we've designed our service model in really 3 elements to kind of mirror a multi-tiered system of support. So this is like an MTSS for ISDs. So we have defined basically our core services, what we will do for all 110 and 33 school districts across Wayne County, regardless of accountability designation. But beyond that, we've recognized that some districts need more than just professional development, consulting, technical assistance, right? So we call that our supplementary level, which is basically like our grant funding dollars, like the regional assistance grant. So Wayne RESA receives regional assistance grant monies, which allows us to provide more intensive support at the school and district level. But even that is not always enough, right? So we have something that we call the district study team. And the district study team is basically, I want to just say it's kind of a parallel to the partnership agreements. So in 2016, we launched our first partnership agreement with the Hamtramck Public Schools, and you heard Tom was here, and Tom, I won't speak for Tom, but I will speak for Tom. He's very proud of the work that we have been able to accomplish in cooperation between the ISD and the Hamtramck Public Schools, literally including sending a team of consultants to the district, having consulting conversations, really understanding the context of that district. 70% or more of your kids are qualified for EL services. That's a different kind of environment, right? And you have to approach the work in a different way when you're working with kids and teachers and principals in that context, in that setting. So I think we had a little snafu when the technology changed. So hey, I'm just going to tell my tech guys, and I'm going to keep going here, but you guys, I want you to know that's not the right PowerPoint. So we need to get the right one up there. I'm fine. I'm good. We're gonna keep rolling, but we need to get the one that was up there originally, just so you guys can work on that while I keep rolling. So, but everything I just said is still true. So that's the good news. So the district study team is essentially the partnership model. So we were elated when Brian started talking about the partnership agreement approach, because we felt strongly that ISDs know their districts better than anybody else, and we, in partnership with the Michigan Department of Education, can truly move the needle on achievement by creating this partnership agreement. So I applaud Brian, I applaud the entire State Board of Education for supporting that initiative. I think we should give them a round of applause. Thank you. We want to do the work, and you've opened up the doors to let us do the work, so we appreciate that. So here's the slide with, that dealt with GSRP. I've already talked about this. So as part of our core services, you have this document in front of you. It looks like this. So to give you a sense, just a taste of some of the core services that we offer to all of our districts, I've provided you with a copy of our professional development catalog. And the professional development catalog is essentially every professional learning opportunity we offer to all districts and PSAs in Wayne County. And so I'll just give you a quick kind of walkthrough. If you turn to page 23, just want to give you sort of a taste of what's in here. Page 23, at the bottom, you'll see the course title, MTSS in the Intermediate Classroom, How Do We Assess and Progress, Monitor Student Growth and Literacy. So focus on MTSS and literacy. Huge focus of the state of Michigan and the 10 and 10 initiative. If you turn to page 27, another example, Socratic Circles, Fostering Critical and Creative Thinking in the Middle and High School. Just a totally different kind of example of professional learning we offer, but our districts need to understand how questioning methodologies can help improve instruction, and we offer that here. If you turn to page 35, another example of MTSS, only the content that's specifically focused is in mathematics, and it's at the K2 level. If you turn to page 71, we have something for new principals and assistant principals. I mean, when you step foot into the principalship, you know, I don't care how many classes you take, they can't prepare you for what you experience in that role. And so we really try to provide deep opportunities for our building leaders across Wayne County to understand what it really means, what it looks like. And the last I would point to is we have a whole section that begins on page, it's actually towards the back, right around 65-ish, and it speaks to all of our culture and climate work that we offer in Wayne County. We literally have dozens of professional learning opportunities. It actually starts on page 53. Dozens of professional learning opportunities that deal specifically with culture and climate challenges in school districts. You know, and one of the things ESSA speaks to, the 10 and 10 initiative speaks to, is focusing on the whole child. And so this is one of our efforts to really recognize that you can't just talk mathematics and science and ELA. Sometimes the issues are totally unrelated to content matter, and you have to address those issues before you can actually get to the content. So that just gives you kind of a taste of our professional learning opportunities. And so last year, we actually trained about 20,000 people here at Wayne RESA. And those are just face-to-face professional development opportunities, which equated to roughly 400 different learning events just face-to-face. So that's not 400 days, but that's 400 different professional learning sessions. So one session might actually be 5 days, right? Because it's a series. And it might have coaching attached to it, where we're literally going back to the school district and we're saying, okay, you learned this, now let's see it in action. Because we know research tells us that unless there's a coaching element attached to that professional learning, you might as well forget it. Actually, the research says that only 5 to 10% get to implementation if you just deliver the professional learning. It's only when you attach coaching that you get to closer to that 85% implementation. So that doesn't include any of the online trainings that we've provided. That doesn't include any of the consulting that we do when we actually go to school districts and sit down with teacher teams. That doesn't include any of the district study team or the partnership work. That doesn't include any of the professional development that we actually offer in school districts when we go to their districts. So how do we make decisions about what we offer here at Wayne RESA? We don't guess. We actually look at specific data points to help us make decisions. And here's an example. So every year, right around November to February, we really start collecting all of this evidence in the Educational Services Department. And we look closely at these data points and we ask the big questions to help us determine what's going to go in this professional development catalog in the following year, what our core services are going to look like, and what our supplemental services might look like. And so I want to focus on 3 in particular, okay? One is we literally have a professional development request form process. So literally school districts log on our website, they look at their school improvement plan, they make a request for professional learning, they ask us to come out to their district. They have to ensure that that request is aligned to their school improvement plan, and they tell us how they're going to measure the outcomes of that professional learning. So it isn't just a phone call that we get that says, hey, we need something for literacy for 2 hours, come on out, just fill the time. It's not about filling the time. It's about ensuring that the professional learning is tied to outcomes, right? So that's one method. Another method is we look at our county achievement data, and we look at it very closely every single year, and we're appreciative that the Michigan Department of Ed has taken on the effort to look at growth now. Growth is so paramount to us looking at achievement trends because it does, to an extent, level the playing field, if you will. We know that achievement is a proxy for poverty, and it's probably the most researched aspect of any educational literature that you'll read. And so when you tie in the growth elements, it gives us another data point to really say, okay, yeah, this is a significant issue in that school district. And we need to use that data to help us and that district study team, that partnership model, to help move them to the next level. And so the last piece, which I want to focus on more for the state board, just because this is where you live, to a great extent of your time. You know, you think about policy and you have an opportunity to influence policy. And so we want to give you sort of a context for how we tackle those policy initiatives that come out of Lansing. And so a couple of examples of that are, one, the recent 3rd grade reading law, and 2, the recent legislation that came out regarding educator evaluation. Okay, so let's start with the educator evaluation. So there are 4 approved vendor models that the state of Michigan has said these would be appropriate for purposes of evaluating teachers, right? And by and large, they're pretty much the same. I mean, they have a lot of similar elements that look at effective pedagogy, instructional practices, assessment practices within a classroom and for a classroom teacher. But what's really been absent in this space is how we measure student growth. And frankly, that's what creates kind of the most anxiety in the field is, oh my gosh, how are we going to measure student growth without alienating and panicking everybody and causing them not to be deeply collaborative to continue to improve outcomes for students, right? So we assembled a team of 14 school districts and PSAs across Wayne County. And our goal was to create a fair, credible, and pragmatic approach to measuring student growth. And so the document you have in front of you, right here, is chocked full of examples, practical, realistic, and defensible examples that I think would stand up to any critic in terms of validity and reliability, in terms of measuring student growth from a practical perspective. I mean, literally, we have presented this all around the state, and it's being used by and large, even outside of the state. I've had the opportunity to present to some of my colleagues in Marquette and Copper County, so from the UP to the west side of the state to, here our home in southeast Michigan. So we've offered several professional development opportunities face-to-face, but we also recognize that face-to-face is not enough. Districts in Wayne County struggle with releasing their teachers. I mean, we need teachers in front of kids. Research tells us if a teacher is absent more than 6 days, it has an adverse impact on student achievement. So we don't want to constantly pull our teachers and principals out of the classrooms, but we need to get this information to them, right? Because how else do we get to implementation and really change practice? So one of the ways that we've approached that is through what we call online professional development modules. And this slide is completely online, and so I hope this works. We're going to click on this slide, and we're going to show you a quick example of what this looks like in action. Just one or 2 minutes. I just want to give you a sense of. So a teacher doesn't have time, or a principal doesn't have time to come to a professional development session. They have access to this document. They've read it, and working? Good? Nice job. Hey, I think Ed deserves a nice round of applause. Thank you, Ed. I mean, he's up here, he's talking under his breath. I'm like, it's okay, it's all right. So this is for the educator that has read the document and wants to revisit it, but doesn't have a consultant standing right in front of them, and they want to dig a little more deeply, right? So we've created, each of these 6 sections is represented. This is harder than it looks. Okay.
Click to open section 3, analyzing data.
So this online module will literally take an educator through section 3 of the guidance document. So I'm going to play just a moment of this so you get a sense of what it looks like.
Open section 3, analyzing data.
Welcome to Measuring Student Growth, a practical guide to educator evaluation. These modules are the result of a collaborative effort involving many educators from across Wayne County, Michigan. These educators were dedicated to identifying fair, transparent, and appropriate methods for measuring student growth throughout the educator evaluation process. Teachers, administrators, central office leaders, and intermediate school district staff work together to understand the research related to student growth models and the best ways with which to implement these models in today's educational environment. The guidance found within these modules represents more than a year and a half of study, analysis, debate, and thoughtful reflection. For more information and resources, please visit the Educator Evaluation section of RESA's website.
So that's the welcome, and it's the same on each of the 6 different modules. But I want to give you one quick minute example of what some of the learning looks like, because various sections throughout actually have activities that are attached. So if you're a building principal and you're literally studying this work with your staff, you can walk through this module and engage them in the activities and do some of the breakout activities to continue the learning. So here's an example.
Now that we have discussed the assumptions and quality assessment components, let's get started in the process of actually measuring student growth. Step 1 involves locating your achievement data. Ideally, 3 years of data is the minimum number needed to make trend statements. Less than 3 years of data is considered to be a snapshot in time. The data may actually be stored in an Excel file, on a legal pad, or located on a district's database. Even though many districts store achievement data electronically, it does not necessarily mean that school employees know how to access the data and/or perform queries.
So when I go to the next, what I want to share with you is this activity.
Activity 1. Let's take a moment to pause and reflect. I would like you to discuss where your local, district, and state assessment data would be stored, as well as the challenges and steps involved in obtaining the data. It would also be important to discuss how a teacher that is new to your district would obtain their data, as well as the process of collecting and storing it. If you would like to capture your thinking, and keep a record of this conversation, click on the icon on the screen for a reflection document. Keep in mind that you will need to make a copy of this Google document before you're able to edit or insert comments. Once you make a copy, your work will only be visible to you and to those you may choose to share it with.
So when you click on this document right here, a reflection document, it will actually bring up a Google Doc with key questions that can be asked by the building principal or leader to really facilitate that conversation in the building. So you see, in this way, we've been able to eliminate the necessity to attend face-to-face professional development. And we're trying to ramp this up on a much larger scale. So let me get back to the actual PowerPoint. So I think what's important to mention here is, again, you know, we thank the department and we thank the legislature, because if it wasn't for the educator evaluation dollars that were given to the ISD, we would not have been able to fund this project. So we did this work in-house. We actually have the staff to create this work. But a project like this costs about $100,000. So it's not an inexpensive venture, but you see the product. We have it forever. And it's just so incredibly valuable to staffs across not only Wayne County, but across the state, because anybody can access this. This is open source for anybody. So I want to jump now into third grade reading, our favorite topic. We love third grade reading in Wayne County. So again, this is one of those areas that has garnered a lot of attention, and you have another document in front of you, and we call this affectionately the third grade reading legislation guidance document. So literacy has always been a huge focus for us, but with the advent and the onset of the third grade reading legislation, it's caused us to focus even more deeply and think more strategically about how we support literacy across Wayne County. We recognize, frankly, there are about 10,000 ELA teachers in Wayne County. We recognize that in a given year, we're not going to be able to provide face-to-face training for every single one of them, and at least not attach coaching with it, which we know has the impact that we need, right? So we're trying to be more strategic and creative in how we provide the supports. So this document was created by 20 districts and public school academies, literally brought them together. And if you look at the table of contents, I think you get a really good sense, which is on page 3, of what you would find in this document. First and foremost, we literally go through the legislation and we break it down piece by piece because it's confusing and it's difficult to follow, especially if you're in the field. So we tried to simplify it to an extent. We talk about some of the important implementation timelines that are required by law. We talk about retention and promotion. There are examples of the individualized reading intervention plans. There are sample communications for parents, sample communications for superintendents, sample communications for parents who want to request a good cause exemption from their parents. We really tried to simplify the process rather than having 110 PSAs and 33 school districts try to do this on their own and create all of their own material. We tried to do it once in a very deep and collaborative way. And that has led to us really digging deeply just in focusing on literacy. I mean, there's been a huge focus in the state. GELN has been a leader in that work and through the creation of the Essentials document. We literally, for the last, I want to say 6 months, Randy has asked me and others to facilitate conversations around literacy at the superintendent level, which I give, just a tremendous amount of credit to Randy for making that a focus for us and really getting our superintendents engaged in deep conversation. We literally have a subcommittee of 9 superintendents coming together tomorrow to study the Essentials documents and talk about how Wayne RESA is going to continue to tackle literacy as a Wayne County. So I applaud that group for being so focused, and it's the timing is perfect, and we're really at a tipping point in the state to do this work in an effective and meaningful way. Okay, I promise I don't have that much more. So the last piece I really want to focus on is this partnership model, the district study team. So when we approached the district study team, we started with Hamtramck, and we focused on 4 key areas. Now, what you see on the screen here is essentially a simplified version of, I call this the not-so-secret recipe to education reform. Education reform is not complicated, but you need 4 key ingredients. And oftentimes we get what's the word I'm looking for? We get blindsided with many other sort of shiny, I like to call them the shiny things. We need to kind of avoid the shiny things and focus on these 4 key elements. And the first being people. So I can't emphasize this point enough. I don't care how good your curriculum is. If you can't find enough people for a variety of reasons, then it doesn't matter how great your curriculum is, doesn't matter how wonderful your assessments are, how aligned they are to the standards. If you're not attracting the right people, and if you don't have enough of the right people, and you don't have a professional learning community structure in place to continue the learning that's driven by teachers, you can forget about the other 3 pieces. So when we sit down with our districts, our partnership districts, that's the first question we ask. What does your staffing look like? Who do you have? How are they supporting learning in your schools? Oh, you don't have you don't have a literacy coach in your school? Well, what do you have? Oh, well, we have a data coach. Okay, let's get rid of the data coach and let's look at repurposing that role and hiring a literacy coach, because we have to start there. We need the right people. So in Hamtramck, I'm going to pick on Tom. Are you back there still?
Yeah,
oh, he left. Okay, well, that's okay. We won't hold that against him.
He took his punch case along.
That's okay. Well, I'm just going to pick on him later because he left. So in Hamtramck, I give them credit because, they have a huge EL speaking population, right? They have tremendous number of immigrants every single year that come to their school district, and they did not have an EL director that was looking at the general curriculum and creating accommodations and strategies for meeting the needs of those EL kids. He said, oh my gosh. Guess what he did? Within a week, he had a posting up. He hired an EL director, and they've had that person in place now for a year. It's that kind of conversation that is paramount to tackling that people issue. And once you get through the people issue, then you can start talking about bringing together district-level teams to study guaranteed and viable curriculum and to create professional learning opportunities across an entire district. Then you can start looking at data points and identifying where kids are still struggling and implement your multi-tiered system of support. So that key there, that second one, in terms of guaranteeing viable curriculum, is curriculum instruction and assessment. And so I would point out just one example of some of the work that we've done in Hamtramck. You have this document in front of you. This is the Hamtramck Public Schools K-5 Literacy Assessment Plan. So once they adopted the MESA units. Once they adopted the MESA units, and they actually looked closely at every assessment they were administering, and they eliminated several of the assessments because they couldn't answer the question, what is this assessment doing to inform our instruction? And because it wasn't doing anything, they said, let's get rid of it. And so if you look at page 3 on this document, it just gives you a quick look at page 7 and 8. You'll see the district put in writing, these are the assessments that we agree to administer for this purpose, and on page 8, there's actually a calendar of when they will be administered, so every teacher in that district knows what the responsibility is and what they're going to be taking back to their professional learning community meetings when they have those conversations. So I talked a lot about Hamtramck, and that gives you a sense of kind of what we did. We started with PLCs, we focused on literacy, and now we're focusing on math with them. We helped them identify that they needed to hire an EL director. They actually negotiated in their contract PLC time because they didn't have any PLC time, so they negotiated it with their union. And we also have assigned a Wayne RESA blueprint facilitator to that district as well, who knows the district, knows the context of the district very deeply, and can help meet them and meet their needs where they're at. So River Rouge is another example of a partnership district. I just want to give you a sense of our focus in River Rouge. It's on professional learning communities. It's back to that people piece, having the right structures in place. We, again, are focusing on literacy and math, helping them to repurpose current staff that they have in place. Again, we have a Wayne RESA assigned blueprint facilitator that knows and understands the district and the context of that district. We also have school health consultants in the district providing the social emotional lessons support focused on the Michigan Model for Health curriculum. And we also have career counselor supports, which Donna and Randy will talk about in a little bit, in a little bit further detail. And then Detroit, We are doing so much in Detroit that I did not feel it would be adequate to just say, here's 5 bullets to cover Detroit. So what you have here is an executive summary, basically, of the ways with which we are providing support to Detroit. We have so many consultants touching Detroit right now that it's almost overwhelming when you think about the amount of support that we're providing. And so what I would point out is you heard me mention that we offered 20,000 participants training. That doesn't include anything you see on page 2. So that list is all in building for entire staffs, specific and tailor-made professional learning around the needs of that specific building and their context. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview. I think I did okay on time, but frankly, I could probably talk forever, but you'd be bored, and there would just be no good that comes from that. You wouldn't never let me into another state board meeting, and that just wouldn't be good. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Liepa. Thank you.
I want to. Yes.
We're so fortunate to have talented people like Paul and his staff that are doing this kind of work, and we're really, really excited about the things that we're doing. Just a quick word on our partnership school districts. We're seeing the type of work that needs to be done there. You know, we're into the early stages. We're into our first 9-month benchmark sort of check-ins. And what we're seeing in River Rouge and Detroit are the right work is happening. We're not going to sugarcoat it to say that everything's perfect and they're flying and things are moving forward from an assessment standpoint to where we would like to see it down the road. But as Paul said, that's not what the work is. Paul did a really nice job of laying out what the work is. And what we're encouraged about is we're seeing the right kind of work happening in our partnership schools. So we're continuing to be excited about seeing improvement in those school districts as we move into implementation of the variety of things that they're working on. The last thing we want to talk about today, and we do appreciate your time, is a specific program that we've created here at Wayne RESA around workforce development. And it really has to do with this issue in regards to what businesses are crying for as it relates to the talent pipeline. And it has to do with really looking at our students where they're at when they're leaving high school and what they need to be successful. And it really started, this effort started when I first became the superintendent here at RESA. And people were coming up and telling me about all of these programs across Wayne County that were available to students. And I would hear about them, and about 1 out of 4 I actually had heard about. Now, I was the superintendent of Livonia, one of the largest school districts in the state of Michigan. I knew about 1 or 4 of these resources that were available to our kids. And so it was pretty clear to me that while there were a lot of good things going on, it wasn't organized in a way that it was getting to our students, which means that they weren't taking the opportunity to then get into the pipeline for our businesses. And so we began to embark on a process where we were going to create a resource, and we did, we have, create a resource that really organizes all the resources that are available out there and have them available for our schools so they can get that information to our students. Above and beyond that, what we knew very clearly was that even though we were going to train all of our counselors, and on November 7th we provided a training to 175 counselors on all of these resources and how to use the website that we've created, we also know that our counselors don't have enough time to reach our kids. When you have ratios of 700 to 1, a counselor to student ratios, and they have all the things that they're responsible for, they're not getting and doing real good career counseling with kids. And so what we decided to do at that point is go and ask for some money, which the state of Michigan graciously granted us through Section 61A5 last year to hire career counselors. And what we've done is we've trained these career counselors to work directly with our schools and with our counselors in the schools so we can get these kids hooked up to these resources that are already there and available to them. And so we're very, very excited, and Donna's going to walk through the details. What I described to you here really was what our goal was with our plan, to ensure that every school in our county is aware of every opportunity that's currently available. We wanted to create a one-stop shop of services to arm all students with these available options and a career plan. We wanted to ensure that over time all students have access to available programs and service. So it's one thing to know about them, it's the other to have access. We want to have access for all of our students. And of course, that leads to meeting the needs of our Michigan businesses, because we know they have unmet demands in their current labor market. And so we want to increase those kids getting in the pipeline sooner. Going to save them money, going to save, when I say them, kids money in regards to what their future plans are, and get those kids into the pipeline quicker for our businesses. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Donna, and she's going to walk through the details of the program that we put together, and then I'll finish it up with a few final comments.
Great, thank you so much, Randy. I just want to say what an honor it is for me to be part of this project, which I know is also such an important project with the MDE, with TED, at the state level and for us here in Wayne County. And I appreciated Paul's quote about implementation, because you will see that this work is all focused on implementation. So what I want to do is start, we're hoping, I'm not sure.
All of it's on the website.
It's on the website, so let's see if we can, oh, we're going to use that. Okay, got it. There's a good sound, I think. We're going to take a look at the website first. So as Dr. Liepa described, we created an inventory that catalogs workforce and career post-secondary opportunities in Wayne County. And I just want to take a look at this landing page. If you look at the top sections, they're focused on post-secondary opportunities. Find a job, job training, pre-employment training, certification and licenses, and then your post-secondary college programs. As you go down on the site, you'll see some opportunities for students while they're in high school or middle school or elementary school. Career exploration, career awareness, getting ready with those high school completion skills, and then resources. So we're not going to go through the whole website, but let me just click on this to show you how it works. So under Find a Job, our focus is on student job opportunities. And I'm just going to click here on Grow Detroit's Young Talent. So with one click, we're going to a landing page that says, here's the description, here's who to contact, the website. Notice right here, by the way, currently the online application for that program is open until March 17th of this year. And then by clicking on the website, it takes you right to where you need to be. So then if you go back, let's see if we can go back here. Let's take a look then at an example here from job training. I just want to show something that's a real hot topic right now, right? These are training opportunities for students who may want to start there before or instead of a four-year college program. And I want to click on apprenticeships. There's a lot of conversation about that. There was just an op-ed about that this last week in the Detroit News. Here we have all the apprenticeship programs in Wayne County, including some from Oakland and Macomb. And a counselor can take a student there to look at how do you get into these programs? What are the prerequisites? Where is the office? How long will it take? And when can you go and apply? And take a look at all of the opportunities there in apprenticeship programs, all in one place. So when you look at the opportunities there, let me see if I can scoot back there for a second. I want to show you also the licensing. We hear a lot of conversation about that. Look at the license programs offered at our community colleges. So students are talking, they know they want to do something in a one-year certificate, a two-year program. Here the counselors can take them right to the certificate programs and look for their area of career pathway and find out what are the opportunities in those areas. So we also wanted to address elementary, middle school, career exploration. So down in a career awareness, I just want to show you, look at the STEM classroom activities that teachers can access. All of these lead to programs here, camps, summers, weekends that you can see. And they can click on these and find something. So for instance, here's Spotlight on STEM. I had the opportunity to visit this, part of Grow Detroit's Young Talent this summer. This tells you the ages. It tells you it's a STEM camp. If you click on the website, There you go, to Spotlight on STEM here at Goodwill Industries, and counselors can help students get there. So this gives you an opportunity to see that there is a wealth of resources, and it's constantly changing and growing. Even here under student support, look at the college planning and support, mentoring programs, academic skills, work readiness programs, all available to students in Wayne County that they're able to access. So that gives you an idea of what is there on the website. Now, when this website was done, the question became, what are we going to do to get the word out? So Randy alluded to the first ever, the inaugural Wayne County Counselors Professional Development that was held last November 7th. We had over 170 counselors, as Randy mentioned, from 31 of the 33 districts attending. We also had Dr. Scott Powell from DTMB there to talk about workforce trends. You all, I'm sure, are familiar with Ted's Pathfinder website, which is new. We had a presentation on that, and our Wayne County resources. They had a chance to learn from each other with a tremendous collaboration opportunity. We assigned their seats, by the way. That was a surprise, but they loved it. Because they were meeting with counselors from all over the county and had a chance to share best practice. So when as part of that work, we talked to them about the pressures of counseling, and Randy alluded to the fact that not only is their caseload so large, but they have testing, they have scheduling, they have crisis counseling. So how could we accelerate getting these career and workforce resources to students? And that's where the career counselor concept came from. So we've hired 2 Wayne County full-time dedicated career counselors. They work alongside the counseling staffs at high schools. You notice their credentials. They are certified, experienced high school counselors, both of them with master's degrees, and I'll tell you why that's important. These career counselors come into schools as colleagues of the current staff, and they bring with them high level of skill in counseling students. And if you notice, we have down there, it's a student-driven, customized approach. So I want to just do a deeper dive about what this looks like in schools. So the career counselors are assigned to a group of high schools. When they're in there, they're meeting with individuals, and they're talking with students about what are they interested in terms of career pathway, identifying the skills, education, and training that are necessary to do that, and creating a customized, individualized action plan for each student to carry them through beyond high school. It's interesting also, we didn't expect this, the number of requests of our career counselors to do classroom presentations. That was a surprise, and they're doing a number of those. One of the key things they're using is the state's Going Pro, top 25 information. There's a lot of demand for that, and we're excited about that work. So let me give you an example of what that action plan looks like. This is an actual student that was put together recently by our career counselor. So you notice that the action plan identifies the pathway, what their post-secondary program is, and where are they? Have they applied, or have they not yet applied? And then there are a list of steps for the students, and underneath that, a set of resources. I want to point out that you see our career counselor's name and contact information on there, because as part of that continuity of support, the career counselor is going to be available in the summer and after they graduate to continue to support and be a resource for that student. Every student has a contact that's an adult, a post-secondary or career adult as part of that action plan. And if you look, you'll see Chris Young, who's the department chair for the Henry Ford Asset Program. We'll talk about that. We have another example with the phone number and the email, as well as other support services that are needed. Add to that, you can't see that very well in the slide, but we send out to the parent and guardian of each student a personalized letter from the career counselor with the action plan. Not only does that celebrate and showcase what the student has accomplished in this planning, but it gives parents the opportunity to support their student as part of their post-secondary plan. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about what this looks like for students, and I have a couple of examples here. There are a lot of them. We've only been at this for 14 weeks, but the career counselors are impacting a number of students. So here's a quote from a student. His name is Nam, and the story behind this is the counselor at the high school referred this to, our career counselor referred Nam. He was 2 months away from graduation. This is he just graduated in January, mid-year grad, and he had no plan. He came from a family from Vietnam 4 years ago. His parents I don't think they speak any English still, and he learned to speak English by watching YouTube. So he was ready to graduate from high school. His parents' dream was that he would go to college. He could not manage the system and had no plan for graduation except to work with some family members. Within 2 months, our career counselor assisted him in identifying a career path in graphic design, worked with him on qualifying for TIP, figuring out how to go to college, and actually he took his action plan, the one that you saw in the previous slide, his action plan to Schoolcraft College to meet with the career advisor. They went through the process, he applied, he's now going to school at Schoolcraft. Within 2 months, his trajectory has changed. Here's another example. This is Jose. He is the first person in his family to get a high school diploma, not a college diploma, a high school diploma. And he was very excited and wanted to have next steps. He didn't know what to do. He really enjoyed auto tech in his CTE program, but had no plan. He had applied to Henry Ford College, but wasn't really sure whether he was going to be able to go. Our career counselor made a connection with the asset program at Henry Ford College in automotive technologies. He actually went to visit Chris Young, and he had the opportunity to take one of the last 12 spots for next fall out of 24 spots. He has been accepted in this program and is now on his way to qualifying to get a 2-year degree in automotive technology. So this gives you an idea of the way this customized approach is changing the lives of students and their post-secondary trajectory. So I just want to close by talking about what we feel are the key factors for success. First of all, you notice this is a student-driven, customized counseling approach where we are meeting the students where they are, helping them find what those pathway steps are, and providing that continuity of support. The next thing we want to mention is how important it is to have a current and functional website with web resources. We heard this from our counselors. Keep it current, keep it functional, and we know how challenging that is, and we are committed to this process. Next, robust workforce collaboration. Of course, building relationships and solidifying contacts with workforce and post-secondary providers is paramount for us to be able to expand opportunities for students. I want to talk a little bit, just for a second, about performance measures. So RESA, with the help of our staff here, has established a rubric that takes students through the career planning process, and we are using that to measure student progress. In addition, we are also developing key performance indicators to measure overall program success. And finally, I just want to point out how important this county-wide collaboration is. One of my favorite quotes is from Robert Quinn: "Build the bridge as you walk on it." Sheila knows this quote. We've talked about it many, many times. We are learning as we go. It's been 14 weeks. So for us, we are using agile principles to move as effectively and efficiently as possible through the learning process. Very rapid cycles of improvement. Daily huddles, weekly meetings that are focused on who is our customer, what does our customer want, our schools, our students, and what do we need to do to meet their needs. And Wayne RESA is in the position to take all of that learning from out there across the county and put it together to grow this program for students and for schools. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Randy.
And I'm just going to highlight a couple of things in regards to next steps. We were very thoughtful in this process to start out with just 2 counselors. We actually got money from the state to hire more counselors, and we said, no, we have to do this right. We just don't need to send counselors out. It would have been, very honestly, a disaster. We had to work with the schools, have them understand what the opportunity was here, and then have that relationship with the counselors. So we started out with two counselors, but already within the 14 weeks, as Donna had mentioned, we've touched over 500 students with presentations, and our 2 counselors have already had individual meetings like the examples that you saw with 200 students. That's in 14 weeks. We figure in a year, we're hiring 2 more career counselors this month, and then they'll be deployed next year. We may hire more next year again, and we figure we will talk to individually up to 3,000 to 4,000 students in a year if we follow these types of numbers. That's talking about bringing this to scale. That's 3,000 kids who didn't have a very good plan that now have a plan where they're going. There are 17,000 students that graduate every year in Wayne County. 17,000 students, we know a portion of those have got a game plan. They're going to a 4-year university, they got a plan what they're doing. This is talking about those kids, how are we going to reach those other kids, and this is an opportunity, if we do this the right way, to reach those other kids, which is not only going to be a significant advantage for them, but a significant advantage for our businesses because they're going to be in those jobs quicker. It's not going to take them 4 years to figure out about the asset program at Henry Ford College and then jumping in. They're going to do it right away. Just to give you a visual, this was one conversation with the class at Taylor Truman High School. They filled out a pre and post test for us. What were the 4 major trades that you heard about? Blank is the program. It's a little test that we gave them. And then we asked them, do you have an area of interest and would you like to see us? And I just want to read you what some of the students said on these sheets. I'm interested in medical or forensic. Yes, I need to meet with you. Undecided. Please call me down. Business, then cosmetology school. Yes, call me down, ! With their schedule. Health science, product manufacturing, please send me down. I'm not sure yet. I'll work with you. I'd like to talk to the about construction careers. Barber, automotive mechanic, please call me down. IT, I need help planning for the future. Declared pathways, listed them up. Please meet with me. Cosmetology, call me down. These are kids reaching out to us, saying, we need your help. They have some ideas, and if you heard the areas that I mentioned here, there aren't very many, if any, 4-year college pathways here that I just described you. They need help. And I think we've been able to organize this to where we can help our counselors help them, and with our career counselors get out there and actually get them the support that they need to get them directed. We're excited. Donna's been in my office, very honestly, with tears coming down her eyes about some of the stories that we've heard of kids that were not going to make it, who now have a plan. And so we're not only excited about those individual kids that we're working with, but the fact that we can bring this to scale. We think we have the resource now through the website, the training through these counselors, and a game plan of how we work this into schools. And we're still figuring it out. Do we need 1 for every school? Do we need 1 for every 4 schools? It's all going to be based on this kind of demand, on kids telling us what they need. So we still have some things to work out, but we think we're really onto something here in regards to matching up kids and getting them focused and having them have a game plan after high school. So we're remarkably excited about this program and excited about the state supporting us as we move forward with that. And I don't know if we went over our time. I'm guessing maybe we did. But we really appreciate you listening to some of the exciting things that are going on at Wayne RESA. We're very proud of the work that we're doing. We're proud of the work that you do and working together, we think we can make a difference for kids. Thank you.
And I know as a local superintendent in the county that Wayne RESA did play a key role in helping us improve our graduation rates, our student performance, and even helping us in emergencies with some employees. So I know I was very thankful to Wayne RESA. So thank you for your presentation. Next item on the committee of the whole agenda is presentation of the January 2018 adequacy study results and recommendations. A committee of nearly 300 educators, business leaders, and others spent 14 months looking at this study, and we're going to get their conclusion of the report. The School Finance Research Collaborative set out to answer the specific question, how much does it cost to educate each child? Augenblick and Associates, in partner with Ficus and Associates, was hired by the School Finance Research Collaborative to examine the resources needed for students, teachers, schools, and districts to meet Michigan academic standards, and they're going to go over the report with us. Also in the audience, I know, is Bob Moore from Oakland Schools, who led this effort. There's Bob over there, and my former boss a decade ago, and Dr. Randy Lipa, Steve Ezekian here, and Kathy Mary. So take it away.
Okay. Appreciate the opportunity. I'm Justin Silverstein with Augenblick, Police and Associates out of Denver, and I have with me Larry Pikus from Pikus Auden and Associates. And I actually had the opportunity to come talk to you all about a year and a half ago, I think, about the successful school district study that the state had put together and that APA did the work for. And I really am happy to be able to come back and really talk about the expansion on that adequacy work we've been able to do working with the School Finance Research Collaborative. And the report, for those of you who are not receiving a binder right now, is available on the School Finance Collaborative's website. And we just want to walk through pretty quickly what we did and really have some time for conversation towards the end. And so we're going to, again, do a really brief background, walk pretty in-depth through the adequacy studies, talk about the other studies we did, and then really focus on those recommendations that we were able to come up with as part of this study. We've heard a little bit about the study team, and APA and POA were the partners, and we've, between the two organizations, have done most of the adequacy work that's been done across the country over the past 25 years. But we had a couple other individuals we want to mention. Michael Griffith, who works closely with the Education Commission of the States and probably knows more about what's going on in every state on what they're actually doing on school finance, helped us out. And then Drs. Chris Stoddard and Jennifer Imazeki helped us with our geographic cost of education work and our labor cost work. And between all these members, we have well over 100 years of combined experience evaluating school finance systems across the country. So just as a reminder, and I probably walked you through this at our last presentation, there are 4 approaches that have been developed over the past about 20, 25 years to really look at what that question of what are the resources needed for students, teachers, schools, and districts in order to meet state standards. And those approaches include the evidence-based approach, the professional judgment approach, the successful school districts approach, and the cost function or statistical approach. And all of them do different things, and we're going to spend more time digging into the top 3, and so I just want to briefly mention the cost function approach. That approach, or the statistical approach, takes hopefully often school or district level expenditure, demographic, and performance information, runs different high-level statistical models, usually different higher regression analysis, and then tries to predict what is needed at a base level and at the level for student characteristics. We did not use that approach, but we did actually look at all 3 of the other approaches as part of this study. And as you'll remember, the successful school districts approach was actually what the state asked APA to do a couple years ago. And the successful school district approach tries to identify a group of successful districts in the state, examines their expenditures, and then provides that information as an estimate of what it might take to be successful. The evidence-based and professional judgment approach really focus more on looking a little bit more in the future, and we'll get more into that. And they build representative schools and districts to estimate that same sort of question. And so we used all 3 of those approaches, and then we also studied transportation, capital, the geographic cost differences that districts face across the state, and then labor market differences that might be faced to attract or retain qualified personnel. We then, of course, have a set of results and recommendations. We want to make it clear that the results that you're going to see are really for districts and brick and mortar charter schools. We did not, as part of this analysis, look at adult education or virtual or online schools. We were looking at that brick and mortar setting either as districts or charters, but both districts and charters were included. And so I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this slide and this concept. I think since this most recent report has come out, there's been the question of, well, why did we need additional adequacy work if the state took, had the study that was produced back in 2016? And really the reason is that when you look across this country now, it is probably seen as really best practice to use more than one approach to ask the question of what's needed at that resource level. And to do that, you want to use you need to use more than one of those 4 approaches that we've talked about. And the state really focused on the successful school district approach, but we did not implement any other approach. And so School Finance Collaborative asked, how could we take into account what was done for the state in 2016, but add to that? And so again, we're using the evidence-based and professional judgment approaches. And I would say the evidence-based and professional judgment approaches differ from successful schools in really what they're asking. So the successful school districts approach, if you remember, identified those schools at the state's request who are outperforming other schools by simply being above statewide average on all of the tests the state was putting out there. And at the time, that was one test, had your English language arts test, had results where at the state average, you had more than 50% of your students successful. Every other test actually had less than 50% of their students being proficient. And so that's really looking at what does it take to outperform other districts in the state, but not necessarily what's going to take to meet all of those state performance standards and really get the opportunity for all students to be whatever term we're coming up with, because we go from proficient to exceeding expectations or meeting expectations, right? We're changing the language, but it's still about high performance for students. And the evidence-based and professional judgment approaches really allow us to ask that question. What does it take, either through the evidence-based research from across the country, to build schools, to resource schools in a way that's going to allow students to do that? Or, starting with some of that same research, what do educators in Michigan feel it takes to actually meet the Michigan-specific standards? So it's asking a bit of a different question. We kind of think of evidence-based and professional judgment as forward-looking. What is it going to take as we improve performance over time? And successful schools a little bit more backwards-looking of what does it take currently, and then currently always means 2 or 3 years back when you're talking about tests, to outperform other districts. The other main difference is we really believe that the evidence-based and professional judgment approaches are much better at estimating what it takes for your at-risk or poverty students, your English language learner students, and your special education students. The successful school district approach, and our company developed it, so it's, we know it very well. It just does not do as good a job at getting that type of information. Okay. So what did we learn? The professional judgment approach actually held, and I put these back together and I typed 11 versus 17, but 17 panels with educators from across the state. Those educators included district professionals, ISD professionals, and charter school professionals. It included teachers, principals, district level administrators, special education experts, at-risk experts, poverty experts, so a broad range of folks. And we built representative schools and districts, starting with schools, reviewing those schools, and then building those resources needed for those special needs students, reviewing that, building on top of that your district level resources, and then looking at it both at a charter perspective and a statewide perspective. So multiple reviews, every number put down was reviewed by another set of educators from across the state. There had to be agreement over time that those were the right levels of resource. And we looked at the people you need and the other costs you need. So we're talking about what do you need for textbooks, what do you need for maintenance and operation. Kind of everything that you can really think of to run a school or to run a district was identified. It began with some of that best practice research, so they weren't starting with a blank set of information, but then we were allowed to adjust for that Michigan context. We think that's an important part of the professional judgment approach. We took all of that information and then we costed it out. And that's one of the great questions here in Michigan is what's the best way when you're thinking of costing out both charter school setting and district settings, what's the best way to cost it out? Because we know there are some differences in costs. One of the big differences in costs was that you have some districts, and you have all districts and some charters who are fully in that retirement system and face a higher rate of retirement cost, where some charter schools are not purchasing that resource in the same way. And so the numbers you're going to see are costed out at a 4.6% retirement rate. But we recognize that districts or charters who are in the system would need that full 25.56. And we have all that information in the back of your report that you have. I believe it's in Appendix F, if I'm remembering right. So some of the results. We were able to, with professional judgment, look at a lot of different characteristic differences. And it's one of the key pieces of our study is we wanted to think about what makes schools and districts different and where might they face differences in cost. One of those, and really the first part of that, is differences in district size. And you'll see that the largest districts had what we call base cost. So the resources any student needs walking into any school in the state who isn't special ed, who isn't from poverty, who isn't ELL, and who's in a district who doesn't face some other characteristic, in this case size, they need about $9,600 per student. And it's slightly more expensive as schools get towards that moderate size. And when those very small districts really have the highest cost per student. They're trying to do all the same things, but at an economies of scale, that's just more expensive. And then below that, we are also able to look at differences in student characteristic. And so we looked at poverty at different concentration levels. And then we also looked at this, what was new for us, something we were referring to as high need poverty. As we were going through the process of being selected for this, the question really came up, are there students who are different, even within the poverty category, when they come to school? And one of the things that was talked about was just being functionally illiterate as they come to school. And so we're trying to figure out this concept of higher need students who are coming from poverty. We found that it's likely more expensive to serve those students. I will tell you, before we even get to the recommendations, we are not at a place right now where we could probably define them in a way we would like. And so it's really one of the recommendations we've made is to dig deeper into that, knowing that there are some variations even within that poverty category. But we want to make sure we identify it in a way that doesn't just generally increase cost, it increases cost where they actually exist. Similarly with ELL, we look both at different concentrations and then also different need levels. And so when you think of how many students are identified for ELL, it's through the access test and the WIDA platform. And within WIDA, there are 6 levels. Levels 1 and 2 are really the highest need ELL students. Then going to 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 are often students who are really continuing, they are at that point where they're going to be kind of moving out of the ELL services, but they do need to be overseen over time. So we looked at 3 levels of WIDA. And again, those students in 1 and 2 have a higher cost, in some cases much higher cost than those students who are in 3 and 4 or 5 and 6. So the question of, could you develop a funding system, again, that really targets actual resource need? It doesn't treat all ELL students the same. And then similarly with special education, we looked at what we call mild, moderate, and severe. And in those cases, mild, moderate, and severe are students basically the amount of time that they're in a regular classroom and the amount of time that they're outside of that. And then we also looked at CTE. So these 2 slides, I just call it, we have a million numbers that we've come up with, but what it really allows for is the ability to differentiate actual district and school needs by student and district characteristics.
Can I ask, is that okay if I ask a question?
Go ahead, please.
Can I ask for, on the last slide, when you had large schools and you had in the poverty area, it seemed to decline based on the size of the school. Well, it was pretty similar actually. But then when it comes to special education, the number actually increases based on the larger the school gets. What do you explain those 2 differences?
Yeah, thank you. In part, that's because as you do the division on this page, it's the denominator actually is that base amount per size. And so the cost per kid could be similar. It's just that the denominator is a little different. Again, I think when you see increases in the actual weight in the smaller places, it's again that economies of scale issue at the school sizes because both the districts are smaller and the schools are smaller. And so they can have a little bit of an additional cost to serve kids at a per pupil level.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Larry Pikus, and I'm going to speak briefly about the evidence-based approach. The evidence-based approach, is, like the professional judgment approach, presents a theory of action about what a school should look like. The other two models really just sort of look at data and come up with a number. And so we think that the popularity of these two models has a lot to do with the fact that they actually speak to educators and look at educational research to understand what schools look like and have a model that one could implement in one school. The difference between evidence-based professional judgment is in our model, we look at the research that exists on what works in schools, what's successful, what kind of practices make the most sense, and then we try to use these prototypical schools as they use in the professional judgment and say, how would you resource that school? What combination of personnel and other resources would be in the school to meet the needs of the children in that school? We then go out into the field and actually do subject our model to the professional judgment of educators in the state where we're working. Alan Odden and I know a lot about school finance. We think we know a lot about educational research. We know less about the state of Michigan, and we think people in Michigan can provide us with a great deal of information that's valuable to what's happening in your specific state. We conducted 4 professional judgment, evidence-based professional judgment panels in Michigan to seek input and modified our model slightly to meet the needs of Michigan children. We then use an Excel-based model where we actually put the resources into the model and estimate what the base cost and the weights for the model would be. We've provided the model to the collaborative, and most of the parameters in the model can be adjusted to see what the differences in costs, what effect that would have on the total cost of the system. The model has 29 different components in 5 areas that look at mostly around personnel, dollar resources per student. There are additional resources for struggling students. This is particularly children from low-income homes, children who require special education, and children who don't speak English as their first language. We then also have resources for the central office for operations and maintenance, and it's based then on the staff compensation, which we generally start with the average salaries as they exist in the state where we're working, to the extent that we can get those. When we estimated our model, our base was, we have simply one base rather than a number of different ones. I'm not sure if it's just that Picus, Odden & Associates just is slower than APA or what, but we need fewer numbers so we can work with them all. So I can talk just as fast, I just can't keep up with the numbers. Our base number is just over $10,000. We then compute a set of weights for preschool. This is a pre-K through 12 model. So preschool has an additional cost weight of about 0.4. Poverty, low-income children, 0.32, ELLs, 0.41. Special education requires some explanation. That's a very low weight. If you're familiar with the research on special education finance for the last 40 years, it estimates that a child who has an IEP and is in special ed on average costs twice as much as the average number in a state. What we've done in our model is applied what we call a census-based model. First, we take the children with severe and profound disabilities out of the model and assume that the state pays those costs directly. That way, wherever a child lands, it doesn't have disproportionate effects on individual school districts. For children with mild and moderate needs, they're, to the extent possible, placed in the classroom in full inclusion kinds of models, and to meet their needs, we provide a set of resources. There's a growing evidence base, mostly from someone in Massachusetts named Nate Levinson, who's been looking at different ways to think about this, and we've been working with him on laying these out. And we think the research suggests that there are fewer paraprofessionals in these models and more teachers having direct contact with students, and combined with the smaller classes in the model, provide for a census-based way to approach special education. It's detailed, much more detail in the report, and I can talk more about it if you like. And so this weight of 0.07 is not applied just to the special education children, but it's applied to all the children in a school district. If 10% of your children were identified as needing special ed with mild and moderate disabilities, it would be equivalent to a weight of 0.7, which is pretty close to what we think it might be. Remember, the severe and profound disabilities have been taken out of the model. So it's a little different looking than most, but its funding is provided at about this, not that different a level than what came out of the professional judgment model. And when we talked with the folks at the 4 professional judgment panels we did, as we worked our way through it, it largely made sense to them. It particularly made sense to the special ed directors, which was helpful. Our panels consist of we had about 4 panels of about 20 people. Half were teachers, and then we used people in central offices at special ed, principals and superintendents and business managers as well. And then for alternative schools, which we
Can I
view as...
interrupt you for a second?
Of course,
I'm sorry,
of course.
I just want to make sure I understand. So the .7, so you take out the most severely disabled because they're assumed that the state is paying for those?
In our model, we would have the state fund the full cost of those children.
So there's,
They know they don't.
they don't.
We understand that remember, it's a model that it's, that the way we would organize the funding for the state is that was what would happen,
Maybe
yes.
At some point, an understanding that the state needs to kick in more money for
Mm-hmm.
those students.
And it would follow that child. So if the child's family moved to another school district, then that child would receive services in the new school district funded directly by the state.
And the .07 represents, you said,
So the typical model, let me try again, I'm sorry. I think I know what you're asking. I've answered this before, so I don't mean to interrupt you. I apologize. In a typical model, you identify the children who are eligible for special education, usually through their IEP, and then you would apply a weight of, say, 1 or 0.9 and multiply that by each of those, say 10 or 12 or 15% of the children. In this model, if you have a school of 100 children, you multiply all 100 by 1.07, and it generates a difference, you know, a sum of money that's then to be used to hire resource specialists, aides, whatever meets the needs of the specific children in the school. The idea being most of the money, you're also trying to be sure that children receive services in their regular classrooms, where they need to, with supported by an aide, or in receiving services in some other forms with certificated teachers. But the decision as to exactly what the child needs is obviously driven by the IEP, and then those needs are met within the schools, and this provides a census-based funding based on the number of children. We believe this number is adequate based on the resources that it rolls into the school, and then it leaves the final decisions as to how exactly to do that to the school sites themselves.
Brian, I have
Yes,
And did you say for the special education, you said if that's 10% or more that fall into the mild?
The example I used was if 10% of the children, if you identify 10% of children as having mild and moderate disabilities, then that would translate to a weight of about 0.7. And that's not, that's a number that's fairly typical. It may be higher in some states and some districts, the variations on that, but this number would appear to work in Michigan. I think it's your turn again.
So the next approach was really revisiting the successful school district results from the state study from 2016 and trying to figure out exactly how to use those. So the state, the approach itself looked at a number of different success criteria. So again, the state set their success criteria as above statewide average. We came back with a couple additional criteria, which included districts who were at least standard deviation above statewide average, those who were seeing growth, and those who were doing well with their special needs populations. And then we took those, the different success criteria, and we actually identified 58 school districts in the state who were meeting one of those 3 higher level performance standards. 4 of those 58 were from what we call those outlier districts. If you remember, the state's approach really focused on efficiency, and there are 13, I believe, districts in the state who really outspend at a per pupil amount far above other districts, and so we had excluded those. And in the end, as a consulting firm, we really recommended using the results from those 54 school districts as the base cost for the state, again, looking at districts who are outperforming other districts on current state assessments. And so our big goal was to take the results from that study and update it for inflation. We then, of course, did that, and it turns out, if you look at the Bureau of Labor and Statistics for the past 2 years, there was no inflation, and so it turns out you can just use the figures from the original report. And so that's really what we're taking from that successful school district report. We have a couple other studies we're going to walk through pretty quickly. The first is transportation, and so we really were doing 3 things with transportation. We wanted to understand what are other states, how do other states fund transportation? What is the current expenditures in comparison in Michigan compared to some comparable states? And then finally, what are the actual costs in Michigan? What are districts actually spending? And then we also took a little look at what are some of the impacts of the evidence-based and professional judgment recommendations. How could that impact transportation cost? And so just really quickly, Michigan's transportation funding effectively is embedded in your per pupil funding. There's really nothing set aside, other than for special education, there's nothing set aside for regular education transportation outside of just the general funding. And so what that means is you have some districts who have very low, or I think in the data we looked at, 17 districts who report 0 regular education transportation costs, and other districts, especially those remote and less dense districts, who are going to have high costs. And what we found is there are 5 different models across the country. One is a reimbursement model. So some states actually look at costs and they reimburse part of that cost. There's those like yourself who really just include it in the state's primary funding formula. There are 10 states who look at the actual geographic characteristics of districts, which really are the biggest driver for transportation costs, and then they fund those geographic differences. There's 5 states who have a specific per pupil allocation, and there are 3 states, one of which is Wyoming, who simply look at basically last year's transportation funding and they cut a check for it. When we look at Michigan in comparison to the surroundings, to the nation, Michigan actually on a per pupil level, so taking all transportation costs, dividing it by all students, you spend about the same. But it turns out when you look at comparable states, so states like Indiana or New York or Pennsylvania, so states who have similar density, and then at least one urban setting, the state spends about $300 less per student. And so nationally you're similar, but for states who you look a lot alike, you're spending a lot less per student. When you look at actual expenditures and you focus again on actual students being transported, the data is a little interesting. The data file that we use, I think it's the 4096 report, measures the number of students being transported to school on a certain day. So that's the count of riders. And then it looks at all the costs around that. And there are 500 school districts in the 15-16 data who actually had riders and transportation costs. And there was only actually around 40-something charters who had that same information. But when you look at the actual cost per student on a district average of transporting students, it's almost $1,000. And it's almost $1,500 with charters. I will say there were 2 or 3 charter schools who had numbers in the $10,000 or $12,000 per student range, so the data just might not have been as clean as we would like. And so, but you can see when you're actually transporting students, you're spending much more than when you look at the average cost for all students across the state. And we had 2 areas when you think of the results of the evidence base or the professional judgment where we think you could actually have an impact on maybe increasing some of the transportation costs. The first is both approaches really highlight the need for extended day or year programs, especially for your special needs populations. So you really want to make sure, in order to run an after-school program, it can be really hard if you don't have transportation for those kids who can't get to and from on their own. And the same with preschool. If you end up having a preschool program and that program isn't full day running concurrently with your school day, you're going to have some transportation costs you face.
Yes, Pam Pugh, please.
When you mentioned the density, similar density, how are you defining that? You're talking about people, population, or schools?
Yeah, there's a couple ways that you can think of density. And some of the work that we did, and you'll see in the report, we were simply looking at basically students per square mile in the district. When you think of actually designing a density transportation formula, you're going to think through either area density or what others do is actually linear density. So how many miles per kid do you have to travel? And so when you think about that, if you have to pick up 100 kids and you can pick them up in 3 bus stops and turn right around and get to the school, that's a lot lower cost than you have to pick up 100 kids and it takes 4 buses and it's 100 miles each day. And so states have tried to come up with good ways of measuring the most efficient approach to picking up students within a district, and then looking at that as a way to actually fund. So it's what they call a linear density formula is one way to think about that. And so it's really about how efficient can you be in picking up kids and transporting kids. And the truth is what your district looks like has a huge impact on how efficient you can be. So earlier I said we looked at capital, and to say that is probably a bit of a misnomer. We looked at the impacts again on capital from the results of this evidence-based and professional judgment study. To do a full capital study in a state, it takes a lot of engineers. You don't want Larry and I looking at boilers and seeing how long they're going to last. And it takes its own study of a similar, if not greater, scale. But what we know, again, is that if you're trying to put in different educational practices, it could have an impact on the capital needs of your schools and districts. And so the biggest ones that we lay out in the report are class size ratios. When you look at the results of the report, especially at the elementary school, you're going to see lower class sizes recommended than many of your schools and districts have today. If you have lower class sizes, you might need more classrooms, and it could be that you don't have the facility space for that. Support staff. We heard earlier, I think, some of the career counseling that was discussed earlier in the presentation. We talked about those types of people. We're talking about having behavior specialists and other types of folks in the schools to ensure that students are ready to learn. If you have more support staff, you might need some more space for those. That extended day and year probably has less of an impact on needing more space, but could have a lot of impact on when do you actually take care of your space. So a lot of schools are using that summer time to really do work on the school, and if you have schools being used more year-round or longer in the day, you just have to figure out when's the best time to actually do some of that long-term maintenance. And then finally, and probably most obviously, is preschool. If you put more students into school at a younger age, you both need more space, and preschools tend to also have requirements for different types of space. There's a lot more regulation around preschool space.
One of the problems that any state faces, but particularly one as large and diverse as Michigan, is that the cost of doing business could vary from one part of the state to another, and that affects school districts as well as any other business. And so making adjustments for cost differences becomes an important part of a school funding formula. And particularly you want to think about the fact that there are many costs which a district just can't control, or many characteristics that they can't control. The characteristics of the children who come, the size of the district, and its location, and so you want to compensate for those differences. There are a variety of ways to think about costs of living and the differences. I think you can all realize that, or think about, it may cost more to live in one of the large urban areas in the state than it does in some of the other rural areas. Housing costs may be higher, so the cost of attracting teachers could be higher. And what you want to do is essentially give a district the ability to have enough money to hire teachers of the same quality, if you will, and have the resources to do that. So teachers may be willing to accept jobs in some areas for less money than they would in others because of the characteristics. There's several different ways to approach doing this. There's traditional cost of living estimates. There are what are called hedonic wage models that really look at what the amenities that are available and what works and what doesn't, what attracts people to your area. Economists today really look at what's called a comparative wage index. And what they do is they look at the wages of comparable jobs that require at least a bachelor's degree, such as social workers, accountants, nurses. Sometimes they broaden this to virtually all occupations, and compare within certain regions in the state the average wages for those occupations and create ratios, and then apply those same ratios to school districts. And then you would apply that ratio to the compensation portion of a school district's revenues or projected revenues to the funding formula. And because school districts are very labor intensive, depending on the state, depending on where you are, you're also usually talking about 75, 80, 85% of the budget really is part of is for personnel, and so you make the adjustment using this comparative wage index, and it's really just so that you're paying people proportionally as much as they're paid in other occupations in their particular area of the state. The study also did a labor market analysis. The challenge always is are teachers being paid enough to attract high quality people into the teaching profession? And there's a lot of debate about what the appropriate level everywhere should be. This is really an analysis of teacher salaries within Michigan compared to other occupations, and on average, our study found, this was the work of Chris Stoddard, that teachers make as much as 28% less than all professional and technical college educated workers. So teachers would appear to earn less than people with similar education in other professions. The study also found, though, that the gap between teacher salaries and the salaries of related workers is smaller in Michigan than the parallel gap in the United States, although it's similar to other states in the region. So the answer is sort of one of these complicated twofold things. Teacher salaries appear to be low. I don't think I'm saying anything that most people don't often agree with, but that in Michigan, teachers do relatively better than they do in most parts of the country. So that leaves you sort of at the answer of what does one do about teacher salaries, but it gives you two sides of a complex problem.
And now the results. So we took all this information from the evidence base and the professional judgment. We costed that out, and you've seen the results there. We took that information from successful schools, and then we also took all the information that's come out from across the country from other adequacy studies to try to come up with one concrete set of recommendations for Michigan coming out of this proposal. Again, we're focusing on all the proposals, all the recommendations about actual costs for the sector, so actual costs for districts, actual costs for charters. It creates this parameter of what's needed at both at the school, district, and student level, so you can make those adjustments. And everything you're going to see here includes all funding, all available funding. So we looked at this and what is needed for students, and the numbers you're going to see here include state, local, and federal funding. You'd want to back off as best you can what's available federally before you kind of implemented this in the state, but we looked at the whole picture to start. And so recommendation 1 is that you use the results of this to create an adequacy-based funding system that has a base cost and then student weights and adjustments for district characteristics. So the specifics on that recommendation. The first one is what base cost should be used. And again, we would say we have 3 numbers, 2 of which are very comparable because they're costed out the same way, the professional judgment and evidence base, and then you have successful schools. There's different in part because it has more of that retirement cost in it, so the numbers aren't perfect. We're actually still trying to noodle through how we might be able to get those a little bit more comparable. And 2, it's looking at current performance versus that overall level of performance. And so we really dug deeper into the professional judgment and the evidence-based approaches and said, okay, what is making them different? Why are they about $550 difference? Turns out it was really to one decision. And so within the evidence-based model, the K3 class sizes are 15 to 1, whereas in the professional judgment model, those class sizes are 20 to 1. And so if you change that evidence-based model to the 20 to 1, you actually come up with numbers that are within $8 per pupil of each other. Underlying, there are differences, right? There are different choices about where you might allocate those resources, but at an overall scale, they are very, very similar. And so our recommendation is to use the 9,590 as the starting point base. But if you were to see over time, and it's going to take more than one day to implement this too, if it gets legs, right? But over time, if you are seeing performance that is lower than you would want in those early grades, you can come back to that 15 to 1 recommendation, which is very much in line with that evidence-based research. When we think about weights for students, we're recommending a single weight for all poverty students of 0.35. That weight both is very consistent with the evidence base and the professional judgment recommendations, but then also with the national information. We've recommended to the collaborative that they dig deeper into this high need poverty question, because we think, again, it was talked about very robustly within the professional judgment panels across, but we haven't really hit yet on what we think is really the right way to identify that population. We are also recommending for ELL students that there be 3 levels of funding. So students who qualify through that test for levels 1 or 2 would receive a weight of 0.7. Students who are 3 or 4 WIDA would be 0.5. And students who are 5, 6, or FELS, so they're being monitored, would be a 0.35. The one key caveat here is if a student is both ELL and poverty, they would receive just 1 weight. And so they would receive that ELL weight to cover both their language and their social emotional needs. And then special education, we recommend a 0.7 weight for mild special education students, a 1.15 weight for moderate special education, and we are going with that concept of for your most severe students that the state would fully reimburse for the cost of those most severe special education students. We believe there needs to be an adjustment for district size, because we do think there is just the cost differences of having both smaller schools in a smaller district setting, and that we would say if you create a preschool funding system, that the cost of those preschoolers is about a little over $14,000 per student. Again, smaller class sizes with more supports around them. And then we also looked at the costs, and we haven't talked much about it yet, of isolated districts. And so you currently have an isolated district adjustment. That adjustment only is for a handful of school districts in the state. We are recommending 2 things. We actually had a panel that talked a lot about this. One, that you keep the current definition, but you take off the cap of it being associated with the Upper Peninsula. And then 2, that the overall additional weight is a 0.04, and that is mostly for wraparound services. It's for the ability to have the student support services And what they talk about a lot is, to have a counselor or a social worker, you have to buy more of them time than you might use in order to actually get it. And so it's either windshield time for them driving in, or you're paying a little bit more to actually get them more full-time in your district. And then recommendation 2 really is that base cost and the weights that we're talking about for special needs students should be funded the same for either district or brick and mortar charter schools. So again, we've teased out that difference in retirement costs for what we're talking about. Districts would need additional funding for the higher retirement costs, but we would treat them the same. The one place where we didn't make a concrete recommendation is on a size adjustment for charters. We think it's something that could be looked at more. We did not look at it directly, and you can talk about there can be perverse incentives when you fund more for smaller places who are allowed to create themselves as smaller places, right? You would really want to think through how does that function. Retirement cost, recommendation 3, above that 4.6% need to be funded as part of the funding system. That's a pretty easy thing to do, and again, we have the base amounts laid out in the report that would account for that. Recommendation 4, transportation funding should be funded outside the base per student amount, and it should be tied to the actual transportation costs. So early on, our recommendation really is to look at actual costs and at least fund that outside of the system, and then try to develop a system we think that is more reflective of actual those geographic cost differences that districts face.
And that would be funded by the state?
It could be part of an equalization formula still, but it would generally be part of the overall state funding approach.
That's something I was thinking about as you were going through transportation, because some of our most recent legislation discusses, or I guess gives local communities the power to levy taxes for transportation. So I know that this is a current study and it's very comprehensive, but we haven't yet seen how local communities will levy those taxes. So I guess for me, a recommendation from you guys on transportation would need to be met maybe with a repeal for the local districts to be able to also then on top of that, sort of just the ethical reality of double dipping, if you will. So just being honest and transparent about the actual cost and then where that's coming from, making sure that's there.
I think it's a great piece, and it's something that we talk about a bit in the report. This study takes you to the place of what is needed at an overall resource level. It doesn't take us to the place yet of who should pay for what. And the reality is, and we get to capital, I believe, next, where this is really highlighted, some of the tax policy that is out there really exacerbates inequity across your districts in the state. And something like a district being able to have a transportation levy, and another district not being able to afford it, or even if they could afford it, generating such little money that it doesn't do anything. I think I will say this, and if I'm wrong, Larry can hit me, but we would say kind of any time that you're thinking of both the state and local support of something even like transportation, you'd want to have similar effort at the local, effort being the number, let's say, of mills being levied, and the state then backfilling the cost of that. And so what you're basically saying is all taxpayers have the same kind of level of burden at a mill level, and then on top of that, the state makes up for it. If you're less wealthy, you would need more support.
So can I jump in for just a second? Because I heard one other thing in your concern about if the state were to fund this, perhaps not having the local taxes. And what I would say is I would assume that the local taxes would potentially still be available, that's obviously state choice, to supplement transportation. So for example, if the state said, we'll fund transportation for students who live more than a mile from school, and your community felt that a shorter distance should be the standard, which then put more children on buses and required a more expensive system, they might want to pay for that and have a levy. And then I would agree with Justin where if districts have a levy for transportation, at least to some point, the state should participate and equalize it so equal tax efforts result in equal yields per pupil transported, or at least per pupil in the district, depending on how you think about it. So there would be some state effort to help with that as well in an ideal funding system.
Dan Pugh, please.
Different direction, but since Nikki revisited the transportation discussion, one of the thoughts that I have, or questions that I have, did you all take into consideration school closures at all, since that, we've kind of stayed, I haven't heard it as much, but at one time we do have that musical chair thing going on, so and looking at this dollar figure when you talked about density?
We did not take that into account in particular. We do think a formula that looks more at density is going to take that more into account. You know, if you have school closures and students are being transported further distances, a linear density formula, as I understand it, would take that into account. You now have to transport students further to do that, and that's one of the reasons that we really are pushing is to do something that is more about the characteristics of the districts, especially in a state with as many districts as you have, who have just great variation in their, just what they look like. You know, the number of kids transported per mile is hugely, varies across the state.
And can change from all the time.
Absolutely. Okay. Transportation 5 is really this idea that the state should undertake a full capital study that examines the costs faced by districts and schools. And when we talk about that, there's really two pieces here. One, you know, all districts and charters, you're really thinking about the quality of those schools. And what we found, and at least what we heard, is that, you know, you have districts who have some of that taxing wealth, you know, sinking funds or bonds or mills, who are able to keep up their buildings or even build new buildings in a way that many other districts, they just can't do it. And in fact, there's some movement between operational dollars and these capital dollars that, you know, some districts really are putting some things into those additional levies that really would fall under that 95-90 that we're talking about. And so you want to think through that. And then, of course, charters really face right now that within their operational dollars, their per pupil amount, they also have to get facilities. And so we think we didn't have the bandwidth and the data to really dig into that, but it's a key piece, right? When we talk about 95-90, that doesn't include building a building or keeping up a building, right? It's the day-to-day maintenance and operations. And so you want to see how that relates. We think that should be studied for charters also.
But I'm assuming you're referring to only those charter school buildings that are actually publicly owned and not those that are privately managed and leased.
I think the study needs to take into account the cost that charters face to have facilities. I think framing exactly what that looks like is an important piece of the question. We would recommend that the state use the comparable wage index to adjust for those cost differences due to geographic location. A couple of the key pieces there is data that districts do not control. That is, it's all data coming from the federal government that's collected yearly. That's about other professions. So it's not about decisions districts have made for their cost of staff. It's about what the market really is paying differentially in different places. And then 7, we do think, you know, identifying really what students are in CTE programs and providing some additional funding because of the additional costs of generally somewhat smaller class sizes and also those supplies and materials and equipment that CTE programs face would be our last recommendation.
Thank you for the presentation. Does the board have any further questions? Michelle Fecta and then Dr. Z, please.
Thank you for all your work on this. It seems to confirm a lot of things that I've already, you know, had come to the conclusion on. But I had a specific question. So you said that the EL, and if they were, also I think you said if there was another weighted factor, I can't remember, it was poverty or special education, you would only use the one weight. And I'm thinking about Flint in particular, where we have high poverty and we also have, like, you know, likelihood of a high special ed population because of lead. So would there be any additional weight when it's a combination of factors going on, or is it just one or the other?
So the answer to that is yes and no. Because I'm a professor, so I don't ever want to really come up with a definite answer. But we think that there's an adequate level of resources. The way it roughly works out is you start with all children who qualify or need ELL services and provide them with resources for that. Then you identify all additional low-income children and provide them with this level of resources. Then there's several levels of resources beyond. In our model, there's different, there are additional what we call tutors or people who provide additional support for pull-out programs, other kinds of support for children. And then there are, in addition, student services personnel or pupil services, so counselors and additional counselors. So you start adding on a fair number of additional staff. And then beyond that, ELL students generate an additional certificated person for so many students. So that when you've added up, walked through that process and done it, you've provided a fairly substantial number of additional certificated staff to meet the needs of children, both because of their the instance of low income and their fact that they don't speak English as a first language. And it comes to a fairly substantial number of resources that work together. And the idea is that, in addition, when you combine that with smaller classes, so that the classroom teacher and the regular classroom teacher has more time with each individual child, there should be enough, and also planning time and coordination time for collaboration time for teachers, so that they can all work together to make sure they're meeting the needs of all those children. The model is conceptualized, I wouldn't say differently than teachers conceptualize it in Michigan now, but provides enough resources so they can actually do it that way. And when all those resources are there, evidence and some case studies we've done in other places suggests that it can work very, very well.
And I think one key piece here is the recommendation is that if a student is both poverty and ELL, they have that higher ELL weight. But special ed is over here on the side. So if a student was both ELL and special education at the mild or moderate level, we're saying the district would receive both of those weights. And of course, if they're severe, we're really recommending that the state would pick that up.
All right, Dr. Z, please.
Yeah, on page 5 on the professional judgment, could you explain how that would be different from, say, a subjective or anecdotal? What it would be the real difference in characterizing the judgment as professional rather than subjective or anecdotal?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a great piece. And so as we run those professional judgment panels, the first thing we talk about with the groups is that, you know, the thought's going to be this is a fox and a hen house approach, right? You're bringing educators together to talk about what they need, and of course they're just going to ask for more. There's a couple ways that we really work through that. First, there is a very concrete defined standard. That standard is in the report that you have as one of the first appendices, and that is the guiding document that we use throughout the approach. So it really is that question of what do you need to meet this approach versus what do you want to have just in a school. So that's really the first piece. We work in a collaborative kind of consensus model, and so you have panelists who are sitting around the table saying, yeah, that's enough level of resource to get this job done. They might do it a little differently. But then you also, remember, have multiple panels, and right, so when one group is building an elementary school, that elementary school set of resources is going to be reviewed by 8 other set of eyes. And so they constantly have to be defending it. And so part of the process that APA is doing is actually taking notes and going through. When someone says, well, why did they pick 20-to-1 class size ratio K3, you can talk about what they think academically that is. And then finally, and it really is the start of the process, we first put out what's coming out of both the evidence-based research and also from the professional organizations. And so those educators are looking at that and reflecting on that information as they go. So if they were to pick something wildly different, you know, the question always becomes, well, why is that so wildly different? We want it tailored to Michigan. We don't want it just to be, you know, kind of a wish list, and it's not a dream list.
I'd add one thing to that, and that is that not only in Michigan but in other states, the first cut of the results of an estimate of an evidence-based model and a professional judgment model come very close. They have very similar numbers, and that would suggest that there's really something going on with the professional judgment, recognizes what works in schools, and the research has found similar patterns. And so I think you could really characterize it as people really being thoughtful about what would work in schools and not just shooting for the sky all the time, which would be a concern, but I really don't see it happening when I've done professional judgment panels.
And then, you know, the last piece is who's around the table. You have lists of all the panelists from both the professional judgment and the EB-PJ panels. I mean, you can look at that list and decide, you know, we're not looking for a sample, we're not looking to be perfectly representative, we're looking for folks who are really known to be successful. Yeah. Bring them together and then talk about what they're doing. I mean, so the panels definitely represented the state both geographically and demographically. But those people at the table, it wasn't just a scattershot of kind of whoever wanted to show up.
That's helpful. A lot of, if you look at a mailbox, you could guess whether there's mail in the mailbox or not. If you see a pair of footprints to the mailbox and then back, you've got some evidence to say, I think the mail has been picked up. They're both guesses, but the one is much more valuable than the other. So, and the conjunction of the judgment with some standards is helpful, very helpful there. On the labor market analysis on page 13, how are professional educators, a lot of professional educators are paid over 10 months, or paid for 10 months work. How does that compare, or how is that taken into consideration when comparing a teacher's reimbursement with other comparable professions?
So you've picked, of course, the great debate among economists is how do you treat the salaries of school teachers. Now my personal view of the matter is that you simply compare the salaries that teachers are paid with the salaries of other professionals, because even if they're only paid over 10 months, their mortgages are still paid over 12, their car payments are still paid over 12. They need to take the number that they've received in payment and find a way to manage that cash flow across the summer. Some school districts pay over 12 even if there's a 10-month salary. I don't know how it works in every district or in every state. Dr. Stoddard actually computed it both ways, and it didn't particularly change the, you can find some way to sort of adjust teacher salaries upwards to accommodate the fact that if they worked another 6 weeks or 8 weeks, to say what that would be. It didn't really change the analysis particularly. So I'm kind of the view you treat the salaries as to what they actually say their salary is, and they'll tell you the number that's in that box on the salary schedule.
Well, but when we say that, is that on an annual basis or a monthly basis?
It's we on an annual basis. Okay. This is, I think, the way she's annualized things.
Okay.
I have Tom and
sorry. I was glad that you mentioned the gap between in Michigan versus others as far as teacher, because I think it reflects that we're in the top 5 as far as states that pay teachers. And I also, I think it's fair to also add in all the federal money and everything else. We're up in around $13,000 a child. So I think it's important to make sure that we mention that as well. And it may be that we just need also to spend it better.
What I was going to say is I gave a deposition in Kansas about a decade ago where I said in my mind, if you could come up with a number that was what it took to educate a child, that federal, state, and local resources should add up to that number. Federal law at this point still requires that most federal resources be beyond what your state defines as adequate. And so there is still that tension between those two that one needs to think about.
Requirements the state places on locals. I mean, we've heard kindergarten teachers talk about, I think what we just heard earlier before, that they spend most of their time, making sure that they're adhering to 80 observations per child twice a year. They don't get around to actually teaching because of, they don't have as much as the things they love and they know is best for the kids because of all the burdens the state lays on them at the local level. So I think pulling back would also help.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Tom. Eileen, and then Dr. Zine.
Thank you for this study. It's a little dense, shall we say. I had a couple of specific questions, which are less important to me than maybe we can do a decide on them. One is, how did the study arrive at the class size ratios for preschool? You make a recommendation that 60 to 80%, or the cost figure of $14,000 plus per child is computed on the 60 to 80% enrollment for 4-year-olds, but not including 3-year-olds. And we can talk about that as an aside. The National Association of State Boards of Education is working right now with the department to try and come up with a better way of educating preschool teachers and compensating them. So this kind of information, if it is not aligned with that, will make it more complicated to get to a better solution. The second one is the big one. There are 2 schools of receptivity on this. One is going to be, to some degree, schools can't do better until education is fully funded. It's a logical conclusion to reach, and as Michigan is compared to other states, has been declining in achievement on the National Assessment for Educational Progress, it's a perfectly reasonable approach to be using as a reaction. The other one, though, is the fact that money has not equated to higher student performance in other states. And I am, because that will be the other rebuttal. So I was curious whether any effort was made in the study, which is finances, to relate it to higher student outcomes in states that have increased their funding. And if not, what your reaction has been, or as people are starting to ask that, I saw an email recently that we needed to ask the researchers that question. from someone who's sympathetic to it. I just am curious as to how that part of the discussion is going to be put in context.
So I think you've hit what's obviously just a crucial piece of this. I'm going to start with the big question first, and then I can answer a little bit about the pre-K question as well. But to start with, the relationship between money and student outcomes isn't just easily correlated. I think there's some who would argue that the system, it's hard to find the systematic relationship between the two, is really what the people who profess there isn't a relationship, that's really what they're saying, is that we've yet to find a systematic relationship. Now in our work, what we've tried to do is look at what research suggests works in schools and build schools or design schools with a set of actions and theories of actions that show evidence that they will be successful in improving student performance. And then we've actually gone in and looked at places that try to implement these strategies, and they typically do have success in improving student outcomes.
May I just interrupt?
Yeah, of course.
Is that academic strategies or funding strategies?
It is funding the academic strategies that work. Okay, so in my mind, it's not just money. It's, I guess, in 1994, a reporter asked me, does money matter? And I said, it does, but it's how you use it that's more important. And everybody quotes me on that. Nobody gives me credit for it, but and I might not have been the first, but I like to think I was. In any case, it's really using the money in ways that evidence suggests works to meet those needs. We think most of that is in the instructional function, that is what teachers do every day with students, and there's growing evidence that first-rate, high-quality teachers are the single most important thing to ensure that children learn. So investing in not only finding the best teachers, supporting the best teachers through professional development and through coaching and other activities that make sure they really are doing a great job every day, and then identifying school leaders who can identify a good teacher and hire good teachers and support good teachers. So of course, just like in any case, when you hire somebody, you want to hire the best possible person, and it doesn't always work. So you want to find strategies and ways to make sure everybody's doing the best possible job they can, which is something I know. I've taken every good teacher, making them a great teacher, and student performance will go up a great deal. So these are strategies that help get to that point.
So if I can just...
I can't make a direct line that says it's going to work if you put more money in there.
And let me ask one more nuance. Were any of the states that are comparable in some ways to Michigan, local control, strong local control states? We are often looking at Canada and Ontario, which has done fabulous things with more money and higher student outcomes, but it's not the decentralized local control setup that Michigan has.
So comparing to other countries is always interesting. We are much more decentralized in the United States generally than almost all other countries in the world. Canada being somewhat decentralized because it's centralized across provinces, as opposed to most Western European nations or Asian nations that are centralized throughout the whole nation. So that changes some of the way those things work. There are two states that have actually taken the evidence-based model directly and used it to fund their schools, if you will, at least to figure out the amount. It's Arkansas and Wyoming. Arkansas, there have been substantial improvements in student performance since 2003 when we first worked with the state to do that. You can see they put in a very strong accountability system, which is also part of this. You need to measure student performance and agree on what your measures of student performance are. Okay, that's a very hard thing to do as well. If I just say, just look at test scores, if it's not all of you, someone back there won't be happy with me. That's a first step. There are other measures of student performance we obviously want to look at as well. Wyoming, which also uses our evidence-based model even more rigorously than we do, and in fact, APA just did a study there, and in one of the suggested they needed maybe a little more than our evidence-based model, so they may stay with the evidence-based model since they have some revenue challenges. Their performance has not really changed that much over time. It's they started at a higher level, they've gone to a much higher level, and it's unclear why. I would argue part of it is an unwillingness to be held accountable. So there's and Wyoming really isn't comparable to Michigan. It's more like the Wild West. You know, you get far enough away from the state capital, and nobody really knows what you're doing. What I would say is we've been there for over a decade. The things we talked about when we started about what works in schools, people just looked at us like we were crazy. You know, well, how can we have a coach even though we've got the money? There's no place in our school to give them an office to work in. Well, that shouldn't be a problem, and we're not going to fund that for you right now. Well, they figured out how to get coaches work and get coaches to work and succeed. And when we go back now, they much more subscribe to the theory of action that's created under the evidence-based model, and they created in the professional judgment stuff that I've seen, very similar kinds of things, so that it's taken time.
In fact, in Wyoming, we looked at successful schools, because you don't look at just districts there because there's not that many districts. And if you actually look at the resource allocation of the most successful schools, it's very similar. It's the lower class sizes, it's having coaches. There's a lot of things that they really said, this is what is helping us be the most successful. And so you see some correlation when you have there. And so you need that accountability system on the back end in a more decentralized approach, where you can't tell folks exactly how to allocate resources. I think when you start to see lack of performance, there is the question of, is that when you should be coming in and talking more about how are those resources allocated at the school and district level.
And they're in their 11th year of using that model.
Sure, so I'm going to let Dr. Z finish up, and then hopefully when we take our break, if board members have more questions, they can come find you.
Absolutely.
Dr. Z?
Okay. When you did the calculation of preschool costs, what were the hours? Comparable to elementary hours or part-time or?
We think preschool should be for all 3- and 4-year-olds all day long. And the only biggest difference between what a preschool looks like and an elementary school is we don't actually have instructional aids in grades K and above, but we do have instructional aids in the preschool. And that our numbers come up very close to what the numbers came up with in professional judgment. I'm not sure exactly what the pattern was, but Justin can fill you in on that.
Yeah, the per pupil amount's a full FTE, and then if you're funding half-time or if students are all going half-time, you would make that adjustment.
Can I just expand on that?
Yeah.
And so just curious, how did you decide when you make a recommendation based on all 3-year-olds going full-time, did you decide that a certain number of people in the state of Michigan would want to do that? I don't know a lot of people, 3-year-olds full-time is a pretty big expectation.
So, and I think I can still go, that's probably the recommendation is the level of resource needed. And we are not at this point saying every student should get this funding. I think there's a lot that needs to be thought through because there are so many resources available when you're talking about preschool. You have a lot of private settings. There's a lot of different ways you could actually meld together that overall level of resource and to ensure that students have a high quality preschool, and you need to think about all the relevant sources. There's a number of reports you look at, if a state's going to take this on, what does it really mean to do that? And I think when you talk to a lot of the panelists in the professional judgment, they would say this should be universal pre-K, and it's coming out of the state. That still could mean different things as you think through what are all the different funding options to do that.
And the state that's been the most successful in this is Oklahoma, surprisingly. I don't know why I should be surprised it's Oklahoma, but they really have pushed for universal pre-K in grades for 3- and 4-year-olds. They've come much closer than any other state. And there are 2 studies that just came out last month that seem to suggest very, very strong effects on student learning going forward into elementary school. So the benefits of it. And our model doesn't have to be implemented in a school facility. There's nothing wrong with Head Start programs that work in another location. There's no reason you can't. We do think it needs to be a certificated teacher and a qualified aide and have the other kinds of resources available. It's convenient in a school, but it's in no way, shape, or form would that be necessary.
All right, thank you for your report. We appreciate your time. Last item on the committee of whole agenda is discussion regarding criteria for grant programs. We have 2 grant programs that we're presenting to the board this afternoon. Is there any questions on those grant programs? Seeing none, we are going to adjourn from 12 to 1 for lunch.